Most relationships don't end because two people stopped liking each other. They end quietly, over years, between two people who never stopped caring, who kept choosing each other, right up until the day that choosing itself started to feel like proof something was wrong. No betrayal, no single unforgivable moment, just a slow drift neither of them could name. And if you've lived through this, or watched someone you love live through it, you've probably searched for the reason. Wrong timing, wrong person, wrong version of yourself back then. But what if the failure was never in the choosing at all? What if you were handed a set of instructions for what love is supposed to feel like, instructions so old, so deeply absorbed that you never once thought to question them, instructions that quietly promise, if it's right, it won't feel like this? Those instructions have a history, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly where they came from and why they may be the single most damaging idea about love you never knew you believed. The instructions have a name: Romanticism. Not roses, not candlelight, the actual intellectual movement, born in the late 18th century as a rebellion against an age obsessed with reason, order, and duty. Romantic thinkers didn't just want better poetry, they wanted to overthrow the idea that a good life was a rational one. Feeling, they argued, was truer than thinking. Passion was truer than obligation. The heart knew things the head never could. It was a beautiful rebellion, and it didn't stay in poetry for long. By the 19th century, this same philosophy had quietly rewritten what people expected from love itself. For most of history, a partner was chosen for practical reasons: family, land, survival, compatibility of circumstance. Nobody expected a spouse to be a soulmate. Nobody expected marriage to feel like destiny. You built a life with someone, and feeling, if it came, was a bonus, not a requirement. Romanticism reversed that completely. Suddenly, love wasn't something you built, it was something you found, a feeling so powerful it would announce itself, so right it would need no explanation. That belief didn't stay in the 19th century either. It's still running quietly underneath almost every relationship alive today, and it's costing us more than we've ever been willing to admit. Here's the belief Romanticism planted so deep we mistake it for common sense: if it's right, it shouldn't be hard. Think about the last time a relationship of yours asked something difficult of you, a conversation you didn't want to have, a compromise that cost you something, a version of yourself you had to stretch into, uncomfortably, to meet someone else halfway. Now think about what crossed your mind in that moment. For most people, it isn't, "This is what building something looks like." It's a quieter, more dangerous thought: maybe this isn't right. Notice the strange math we run without ever questioning it. Two people arguing about which restaurant to pick or whose turn it is to do the dishes. That friction barely registers. We shrug it off as the texture of everyday life. But the moment friction crosses whatever line Romanticism quietly drew for us, a real argument about money, about the future, about whether you even want the same things, we stop treating it as a disagreement and start treating it as a diagnosis. Not "we're working through something," but "this is the sign." That threshold is Romanticism operating at full strength. Because if love is a feeling that arrives, not a skill that's practiced, then friction can only mean one thing once it gets loud enough: something is wrong. Effort stops looking like effort and starts looking like evidence, proof, finally, that you found the wrong person. And the relationship doesn't get to fail on its own terms, it gets convicted the moment it asks too much of you. Which means the people walking away from good relationships and the people walking away from bad ones can end up making the exact same decision for the exact same reason, because they were taught to read effort as a red flag instead of what it actually is: the price every relationship, good or bad, eventually asks you to pay. But Romanticism doesn't stop at teaching us to fear that price. It also promises something far more seductive: that the right person would let us skip paying it at all. This is the myth underneath the myth. Not just that love shouldn't require effort, but that real love comes with a permanent supply of the feeling you had at the very beginning. The nervousness before a text back, the way a room changed when they walked into it, the sense that you'd found something rare enough to reorganize your life around. Nobody tells you that feeling was never built to last, because it isn't actually love, it's novelty. It's the brain's response to uncertainty, to newness, to someone you're still in the process of learning. Romanticism, though, never separated the two. It sold the opening feeling as the relationship itself, as the proof and the promise, all in one. So when the feeling inevitably quiets, most people don't think this is what depth feels like. They think we lost it. And from there, the myth splits people into two different kinds of poverty. Some leave to go chase that opening feeling again with someone new, not realizing they're not choosing a better love, they're just choosing an earlier chapter. But others stay, spending years beside someone, still physically present, while privately mourning a version of the relationship that no longer exists, not fighting to build what's in front of them, but waiting, almost without noticing, for a feeling that was never going to return on its own. They don't leave, they just stop fully arriving. And so the cycle repeats one way or another, not because people keep choosing badly, but because they were taught to chase a feeling that was only ever meant to introduce them to love, never to sustain it. What's strange is that both paths, the leaving and the staying, start from the exact same wound, the belief that the feeling was the relationship instead of just its opening line. And that belief has an origin story of its own, one that goes even further than the feeling itself. That origin story starts with a single idea, one so familiar we've stopped noticing it's an idea at all, that somewhere out there is one person who will simply understand you, without you having to explain yourself, without you having to teach them how to love you. Romanticism didn't invent this idea, but it gave it a modern shape, dressed it up as destiny, the soulmate, the other half, the person who completes a sentence you didn't know you'd started. Tender packaging for a strange demand that another human being should arrive already fluent in you, with no instruction required. Watch what this does in practice. Two people start a relationship and one of them has a need for reassurance, for space, for a certain kind of attention after a hard day. Instead of saying it, they wait, quietly hoping it will simply be noticed. Because if this is the right person, shouldn't they already know? Explaining feels like admitting the connection isn't what it was supposed to be. So people stop asking for what they need and start testing whether it's given freely. They mistake having to communicate for evidence of incompatibility, as if a soulmate wouldn't need directions. And when the other person inevitably misses what was never said, it doesn't register as an ordinary human limitation. It registers as a quiet verdict. Maybe this isn't the one after all. The cruelty of this myth is that it punishes the exact behavior good relationships depend on. Communication starts to feel like proof of failure, at the precise moment it should be treated as the whole practice. And underneath the soulmate myth sits an even older assumption, one so basic we rarely think to question it at all. The belief that love, if real, should simply know what to do. Romanticism's final gift was the most seductive one. The idea that love is a feeling you have, not a set of skills you practice. That the right heart, once found, will simply know how to love well, the way breathing doesn't need to be taught. This sounds almost too obvious to question. Of course, love should come naturally. But notice what this belief quietly excuses us from. If love is instinct, then no one ever has to learn how to listen without getting defensive. No one has to study how to repair after a fight, or how to say a hard truth without cruelty, or how to stay curious about someone long after the mystery of them has worn off. Those would be skills, and Romanticism never taught us to think of love as something you train for. So people enter relationships the way they'd enter a fight they were never given lessons for, expecting instinct to carry them through, then quietly blaming themselves or their partner when it doesn't. They call it incompatibility. They call it falling out of love. Rarely do they call it what it more often is: two people who were never taught the difference between wanting a relationship and knowing how to run one. And that omission is the quiet thread connecting everything we've named so far. Every myth pointed the same direction. Love was never supposed to be built. It was supposed to arrive, fully formed, asking nothing of us. So sit with this for a second. Not the relationships themselves, but the beliefs underneath them. When did you last mistake struggle for a warning sign? Let that sit for a moment before the next one. What have you gone quiet about, waiting to be understood without saying it out loud? Sit with that too. Are you building the relationship in front of you, or grieving the one you remember? None of this makes you naive or unlucky in love. It makes you someone who inherited instructions you never wrote and never chose. Instructions 2 centuries old, still shaping decisions you thought were entirely your own. The only question left is whether you keep obeying them without knowing they were never yours to begin with. Here's what changes once you see it. If love was never an instinct, you were never failing at something you were supposed to just know. You were only ever untrained. And skills, unlike feelings, can be built. Not through more passion, more chemistry, more searching for the one person who might finally make it effortless, but through the unglamorous, repeatable work of actually learning how to love someone. Saying the thing instead of waiting to be understood. Staying through the friction instead of reading it as a verdict. Choosing someone again on the days the feeling goes quiet, not because it proves anything, but because that choosing is the relationship. Romanticism promised you a feeling that would carry you. What it never told you is that feelings are poor architects. They can spark a beginning. They were never built to sustain a life. Maybe that's the real work. Putting down the instructions you never chose and picking up the simple, patient practice of loving someone on purpose. Because in the end, it's the simple, unglamorous choosing made daily on purpose that any love actually survives on. Enjoy the simple things in life because it's the simple things that make life amazing. Peace.